some Q&A. Michelle, why don't you join me here? Now's the fun part, guys. We've got 8 really, really bright MBA students from Generation Y here that are at your beck and calling for Q&A. I think their presentations gave us a lot of insight into not only the results of the survey, but also their own personal perceptions of what's happening in the marketplace based on the facts that they looked at. So I think once we get situated here, we're going to have some good discussion around, yeah, go ahead, turn the projector off, thanks. We'll have some good discussion around what it is that is most important and what it is that's on our minds. So since I have the microphone, I get to ask the first question. And I'm going to have the folks from Boston College answer it. So you mentioned some examples of good programs that you see outside the automotive industry, and you didn't provide any examples of any good incentives, good programs, good marketing that the automotive OEMs are doing today, but there has to be something out there that you saw as being positive. You also mentioned the word brand ambassador, which is a really important word. I'm going to take away one of the positive programs away from you, the Ford Fiesta movement, and their use of brand ambassadors to get their message out to the point that 60% of the world knows this car exists and it hasn't even entered the U.S. market yet. What else is happening? What is GM doing? What is Chrysler doing? What is Toyota? What is Honda doing that you think resonates with Gen Y?
Yeah, well, you mentioned, what was the first one that you had mentioned, the first part of the question, I'm sorry?
What incentive programs or promotional programs are out there that the automotive companies are producing today that work?
I'd say previously it was just not on the table for us. I mean, incentive programs were not things that you thought about until maybe you got to the dealership. But now and in the last year or two, it's with the economic crisis and people who are underemployed especially, incentive programs can be a huge motivating factor, at least among my friends. So, but with regard to the ambassador program, what are other companies doing? I honestly don't know. That's the only one I know of.
Well, in terms of what automobile companies we feel like are really doing right, we did think that Ford and Toyota with that, thank you, with their more authentic advertising, using consumers in their advertising was really great for their image. And also, as somebody who has 2 cars that probably will die in the next 3 years between my husband and I, I'm starting to look at what we might buy, and safety was really the big issue, and I always thought Volvo, Volvo, Volvo. And now I'm looking at the safety ratings, and actually they're not really the best one. There are some American car manufacturers that are really stepping it up, and they're rated much higher. So I think that there's a lot that's happening that's exciting in the American automotive industry right now.
Okay, great. Okay, any questions from the group here? Dan Lockman?
I'm going to ask the team from Southern Cal. There was a lot of talk about one price selling and not haggling, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts why more automotive companies haven't gone down that path.
Well, I would say one thing is that having incentives gives a company the flexibility to charge higher prices when a model is fresh and hot, and then lower it later when it has dropped off in popularity. Now, however, what's happened probably since the late 90s is that automotive manufacturers have used incentives so much that people are used to getting some chunk of price off the MSRP. And to a certain degree, being able to brag about how much you got off on the MSRP is no longer really an issue. Now it becomes, what did you get as the bottom line price? And that's why those no haggle type of pricing structures are increasing in importance for Gen Y. Now, however, how to transition from cars that are priced knowing that they'll be popular at one point and drop off later and need incentives to having a uniform price from beginning to end is going to be difficult. For instance, if you have a Scion that you're only selling it for pure pricing, it sells at MSRP, that worked great and they were really hot when the car first came out, but it's a little more difficult now because then you have to find other ways to attract people into the showroom to buy a car that's now 5 years old or on the market for 5 years.
Which team did, well, you guys all talked about this, and actually this was a topic last year as well, and it's the dealer experience. And it's pretty clear that whatever that experience is, it doesn't seem to be working. And I don't really, whatever team wants to answer this, tell me what your perfect dealer experience would be as a Gen Yer.
Experience. I just feel like going in and anticipating the upsell, you know, that's what's kind of scary to us. You know, you don't want to feel like you're getting taken when you're making this huge purchase. You want to feel like you can ask this person questions and get an honest answer that's not going to be in their self-interest. It's just in yours. And as Greg said, I feel like we do a lot of our research beforehand, so we kind of know what we want when we get in there. So just, if you can just help us expedite that process as much as possible, I think that is the ideal experience.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, the sales process was 20 minutes, and that was most of it was just a test drive, and I'm sold. So it's, the dealer experience to be 4 hours, and the selling process is only 20 minutes of that. The rest of that time is really just frustrating time. So I guess my perfect dealer experience would be the 20-minute sales process that was going on there.
Great. Go ahead, Michelle.
Questions from the audience? This one right here. Please, we'll hand these mics out and then take it back.
Just a bit of a follow-up to the last question. It's primarily directed to a combination of Clemson and Boston College. I think it was Clemson, you mentioned that the dealership would be the #1 place that people would go to get their purchase information, if I remember correctly. And in Boston, you mentioned that one of the major losers was the dealership experience. So can you expound, maybe both of you, a little bit on what is it about the dealership that would drive Gen Yers to the dealership to get their, be the primary source of getting their information? And then Boston, if you could expound just a little bit on what is it that those companies that you listed on your last slide maybe do a little bit differently or uniquely that you think could be adopted in the dealership experience that might hold Gen Yers there?
I think it's important to remember that as a generation, we're all, grouped together as the same type of person, but we're all very different. As you said, going to the dealership, that is probably one of the biggest search behaviors for people who are in the older part of Generation Y. However, the younger part of Generation Y are very dependent on their parents. They do go to dealerships, but they bring a parent along with them. I'm personally part of the younger part of Generation Y, and I have never been in a dealership before, and I probably won't go for another 5 years to ever look at cars. And when I do, I would still probably bring a parent. So it is important to consider the age group of the generation that you're talking about. I think it might have fallen as a loser because they might have been talking about the lower age group of the generation. However, I don't think it's a loser altogether. I think it's a very popular search behavior for more independent, mature people in the generation.
Yeah, I was Freddie first job at the time, so yeah, absolutely.
Just kind of elaborate on that a little bit is that when we mentioned that visiting the dealership was the top search behavior, that was with the segment 8, the married with children, and their average age group, like Jocelyn said, was at the upper end of members of Generation Y. And what we found with our study was that it did rank consistently in the top among the other segments, but with like what happened with Greg, they're searching for their information on the internet before that. They have 3 or 4 other information outlets that they're going to before they go to the dealership. So I think for me personally, I mean, if I walk into a dealership, even for just a service on the car that I currently own, I mean, I know what's wrong with it. And I mean, obviously I wouldn't be there if I didn't know that at least something was wrong with it. So I think it's more so that we might be viewed as not knowledgeable. And I think that's sort of where it falters, is that you know what you want when you go in there, and you don't want to be spoken to as if you're 5, because you're not. You're 25, or you might be a little bit younger or older, but that, I mean, it needs to be a positive experience because they have their information before they get there.